Just think for one moment about something completely new that you started to use and your reaction after using it was, "Whoa, this is just what I've been waiting for." I had this wow experience when I started using Google Maps as my navigation device. It was free, plus it gave me congestion mapping and got me where I needed to go quicker. Getting this wow is the result of a customer taking action to acquire a new value proposition and receiving the value creation promise contained within it. It is the culmination of three things coming together. First, identification of a target customer, which represents an important value gap in the market. Second, delivery of a coherent value creation promise. Third, a strong alignment of willingness to pay and the cost. Great care must be taken when designing value propositions with considerable live testing with customers. The cost of not doing this may mean facing rejection by customers.
Hello Ian.
Hi Ali.
We have been talking about jobs to be done in the previous episode. So how are value proposition design and jobs to be done linked together?
That's a great question, Ali. You need to remember that the goal of job to be done is to identify the customer segment that has a significant value gap. In other words, part of the market where the customers are actually being underserved or not being served at all. So the value proposition is a way for us to entice this target group of customers who are underserved to take some action. We want them to commit, typically through the purchase, through paying for a product or service. So there are a number of complexities to value proposition design that we need to think about. But remember one fundamental thing, that your goal is to convince this target customer group that your value proposition will get the job done better and or cheaper, and it must do this than what's currently available in the market. So the customer must really believe this, that they're going to gain from your value proposition, and it's going to outweigh any real or perceived risks that they might be feeling about this product or service.
So what then is the value proposition design process an entrepreneur has to follow?
So I've outlined a value proposition design process that comprises 8 steps. The first 2 of these steps are about putting your job to be done insights into context and to embed these insights at the centre of your value proposition design process. At this point, you're fully committed to defining what customers really value. It's not about what you feel or even an expert may feel, it's about what the customer understands as value. This is what you need to embed into the core of your value proposition. So let's think about Apple iPod for a moment. Its value proposition needs to be aligned to that customer value gap, and it needs to fill that. If it doesn't fill that, then customers are going to be disappointed and not really understanding what it's going to do for them. And then it would disappear, most like all the other MP3 players did. So, the iPod's value gap needs to be based on something real and tangible. And what this was at the time was that the customers were wanting their personal music collection to be, the whole of that collection, to be available to them on the go. So we go back to 2001, before the MP3 player became successful, you would have to actually carry your CDs around with you if you wanted to listen to music while on the bus, walking to college, exercising, etc. Yes, there were portable devices like CD players, but there were many problems with them. They were bulky, so pocket, they would have battery, the CDs would skip. There was a whole host of product-based issues which made them inconvenient. Now, what Apple needed to do was to assess all these hundreds of potential ways it could align to these customer problems, but they needed to make the iPod resonate with the most important problem, and that was their proposition, which was 1,000 songs in your pocket. So this concept of 1,000 songs in your pocket was referencing that key pain point, which was, I want to take my music collection everywhere. So this was the pain point in which people would take action. And this is why the iPod which flew off the shelves, it sold in droves. Now, the thing that you need to focus on is, what is that promise? What is that compelling message? And what is the price of the action required for the customer to take? Those are the next steps that we need to take in the value proposition design process.
Now, can you give us an example of how new value proposition design was used by an entrepreneurial company?
Yeah, sure. Let's think about Ofo, the dockless bike provider from China. So it all started at Beacon University, when the founders realised that the staff and the students were struggling to get around campus. So they needed to pinpoint the exact nature of this struggle. They had to understand what this value gap was that existed. What was the job that we're trying to get done? So they were trying to move around campus, this huge campus, and they had to figure out what was going on. So if we look at the solution decision map that we defined in the previous episode, we could start to map out Offo's value gaps. And there are actually 3 value gap areas that we can investigate. One of the most critical value gaps that the founders discovered was the need to reduce costs of travelling longer distances on campus between buildings. But this was particularly relevant to price-sensitive students. Another value gap related to the ownership of bike. So once you own your own bike, you have to then maintain it, you have to store it somewhere. It's not easy for students in small apartments to store bikes. And also, they're costly, they're not cheap, they're going to get stolen. So owning a bike might sound quite simple, but for a student, that becomes a real hassle. So Ofo needed to establish how it would solve these important problems, the value gaps, and turn that into a value creation promise. The promise needs to solve the pain, the gap in the market. If it doesn't do that, Ofo won't resonate. So the interesting thing about Ofo is that most people and students knew that bikes on campus would be a really good idea. So half of the value proposition was already understood by the target customer segment. So the big question was how do they make these bikes available at a low price and in a way that the students would believe that it could be delivered. So they needed a value proposition that would help them to supply, share and store bikes at the right price and the right time.
What was the final value proposition for Ofo, and how did they scale it?
So within the 8 steps, there's a formula, step 5, where the entrepreneur needs to encapsulate aspects of the value gap and aspects of the value promise and how they're going to deliver that. And that can be turned into a coherent value proposition statement. So, for Ofo, the value proposition statement goes something like this. So, a mobile app which allows Peking University students and staff to move between campus sites and buildings, to travel faster than walking and cheaper than taxis, by open access to hundreds of shared campus bikes with instant GPS, bike locating, digital locking and anywhere drop-off. So this is a long version of the value proposition, but if you think about the internal team within Ofo, they needed to understand what that complete proposition was. Now for the customer, you needed a better and a more simpler way to articulate that proposition. But you need to start with a detailed understanding of what that is by combining all the elements together. I think it's worth noting that Ofo has actually recently failed, and it's not actually because of the value proposition. The value proposition they proved could be delivered, particularly within campus settings. But actually, a lot of their issues came from the execution of bike supply, storage, and also the quality of these bikes. There were lots of reports of bikes literally lasting a few months. That is not going to create a sustainable business. They did prove that this dockless bike buying proposition is workable and transferable to other contexts, other situations. Their mistake was that this value proposition needed to shift accordingly to up-and-coming problems. They tried to scale too quickly. They didn't solve the problem in China first. They tried to scale globally, and they took all the quality problems with these bikes with them. They were always going to create an execution problem.
Thank you very much, Ian.